Coming up on our Finding Better podcast, I continue my conversation with my daughter, Kristin, about her journey with her eating disorder. Eating disorders are mental illnesses that are real. If you know anybody going through it, or you know somebody who has loved ones going through it, please share this. It is informative, in some ways heartbreaking, and you could save a life. Hello, 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 and welcome back to our Finding Better podcast. My name is John Suzuki, and I am your host. And this is where we share real life experiences and wisdom of having found better in our own lives and sharing it with you. Because sometimes, the best way to success can be accomplished by copying it. And so we share parts of our lives with you. Today is part 2 with my daughter, Kristin Nguyen. Obviously, a very, very special person in my life. And on episode 78, which was just last Tuesday, we started talking about eating disorders and PTSD and really mental illness. And we talked about Kristin's journey with her eating disorder and what she went through. And it really is this episode is not only for those who are suffering from eating disorders or any other mental illness, but also for the loved ones of the people, who are having to go through it and trying to figure out, because, sometimes it's nice to know that you're not alone. And our experience, both from Kristen's perspective and our perspective, was that it was, in fact, a feeling that we had at the time that we were alone. So we're here to tell you that that's not the case. Kristen, welcome back to Finding Better. Thank you again for joining.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, hi. This is kind of weird, but it's all about love and it's all about sharing. So, Kristen, we talked last time, and this is a really interesting format for me as your dad to talk with you, because we're kind of talking as objective people and not a father-daughter relationship. And you had shared some things last time that I'd never heard of, that I never heard, that you never told me, and I'd never heard. And a couple of times I almost lost it, and I'll probably come close to losing it again. But
Mhm.
anyway, you talked last time about your journey, and 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 I guess this time let's talk about how about learning to cope. Having folks can go back and listen to episode 78. But what was your journey in learning to cope and move on?
Move on in life after treatment.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Um, so last time we talked about, so I went to a treatment center. It was a partial hospitalization program, short for PHP is the abbreviation. And it was 11 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when I refer to treatment, that's what I'm referring to. I was there for 2.5 months, almost 3 months.
And remind
Um,
us remind us on the name of your eating disorder and what that was, real quick.
so yeah, so my official diagnosis was binge eating disorder. And the definition of binge eating disorder is obsessively or compulsively, eating large quantities of food beyond the point of being hungry. But what I'd kind of explained before was that it's a lot more complex than that, where a lot of people, myself included, you have the binge component, but you also have the restriction component too. So it's not
Mhm.
just you're only binging, it's you're binging and then you're restricting and then you're binging and then you're restricting and you're binging as a way to make up you're restricting as a way to make up for the binge and you're binging as a way to make up for the restrict and it just
So it's a
becomes
vicious, yeah, it's a vicious cycle. It just
exactly, yeah. So
feeds
that
each
that
other. Wow.
that was my official diagnosis, and there was a number of other things involved in it, like exercise kind of makes it a little bit more complex, but it's mostly that kind of binge restrict cycle. And actually, too, one thing that I wanted to mention that I don't think a lot of people know is that there's actually like more than a dozen different types of eating disorders because everybody's is so different. And now they're
Mm-hmm.
finding themes within these different types of eating disorders that people have. So there's I mean, there's one called ARFID, there's one called OSFED, there's one called orthorexia, right? Like there's all these different types of eating disorders. So mine specifically is categorized as binge eating disorder. That's my diagnosis.
And these eating disorders, my understanding is that they really don't go away,
No. I wish they did.
right?
It'd be great if they did. But
I
yeah,
mean, you can recovery doesn't mean you're completely healed. It's not like you're healed from a cold.
you don't get
And
a
hmm,
you don't get a new brain.
you don't get a new brain. What does that mean?
So eating disorders, it's a mental illness, right? So
Okay,
and when you have hard things happen in life and that's your coping mechanism, right? Everybody has different coping mechanisms. Those who have eating disorders oftentimes when there's a struggle revert back to the eating disorder as a coping mechanism.
got it.
So when I say you don't get a new brain means that that sort of residue is still there even though you might be doing really well in life, and it's okay. You just have to learn how to. Everybody has their own struggles, everybody has their own stuff that they have to deal with. It's just a matter of how you deal with it.
Hmm.
um so yeah, and sometimes being in that recovery can be harder when life is harder, and sometimes it's easier and it's great, but it just kind of ebbs and flows.
And can you the term trigger comes to mind,
Hmm.
right? I mean, you're one day you're doing fine, everything's going wonderfully, and then when you say reverting, um, it can come back.
Yeah, so I think I actually kind of, before we kind of dive into this, I wanted to kind of give the context of to what we're about to dive into
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
chatting today and everything, because last week a really I was having a really difficult time, and I was having a really it's pretty rare that I get a binge or a restrict cycle, like they call it a disordered habit, right? When your motivation isn't to, so I guess let me just think of an example, right? So let's say you're watching TV and you're like, I'm just gonna get some ice cream. And
Hmm.
then you get some ice cream, you're eating the ice cream as you're watching TV, and you're like, oh, I just ate the whole gallon. Whoops. Kind of thing, right? Versus that is, I would say, normal eating behavior, right? Even though you've just eaten a lot, even though you've just technically binged on something, right? It's normal behavior because you were like, oh, okay, well, there it is. Whoops, there it is. Whoops, I did it again. Whatever.
And it was a
If
really good movie, and you lost count of the number of times you scooped a nice piece of ice cream.
like right, exactly. My stomach might hurt a little bit, but it was a fun experience and whatever. Life goes on. If you, in the case of my eating disorder, as an example, I might be thinking weeks in advance or months in advance, okay, I'm going to diet for 4 weeks. I'm going to be on a really strict diet for 28 days, and I can't derail from it at all. This is what my eating regimen looks like. This is the timing. This is when I stop eating throughout the day. This is what my exercise routine looks like Monday, Thursday, Friday, right? Or whatever it may be. And then on this day, on the 29th day, once I've done really, really quote unquote well for this period of time,
Hmm.
I'm just going to treat myself and I'm just going to binge, right? And I'm just going to have the most perfect binge with the perfect ice cream that's going to start at 9 p.m. at night with this movie that I'm going to watch, and it's going to be great, right? So you get there and you're not necessarily hungry. You're not necessarily focused on the movie. You're just focused on this food that had so
Oh,
much hype associated with it. And you eat the whole thing and you feel terrible. And then you afterwards are like, why did I do that? That was terrible. I shouldn't have done that. I was planning for it. I didn't deserve it. Blah, 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 blah. And then you restrict again. So the behavior of eating the ice cream for a non-disordered person and a disordered person is exactly the same, right? You finish a gallon of ice cream, but the motive behind
hmm.
it is
Yeah,
complete.
yeah, yeah.
And so for someone who has an eating disorder, so me as an example, um, last week when I was having a really hard time, it triggered a bunch of eating disorder urges that haven't really hit me for a really long time. I don't it's pretty few and far between that I get eating disorder urges now.
Hmm.
And I did admittedly I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I did actually act on some of it, which is a big red flag as far as, you know, when you're in eating disorder recovery. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this today was because I thought that it could be a helpful thing for people to kind of just bring a little bit more humanity to this, I think, because the last episode I was saying, like, yeah, like I'm doing great. I was, I
Hmm.
put myself in recovery. Nobody else
Hmm.
around me wanted to be there, right? But that also, I struggle too, and it's still something that I have to work for and fight for. But last week, I remember Dad, you and Mom watched my kids because I was like, I don't know what's going on and I can't do anything. Ah, and I was just kind of freaking out. And I was like, I know we're supposed to do the podcast, but I can't sit
Right,
there and like
right.
I'm doing super
And that
well.
was fine. That was fine.
Totally. But then I think this could be in some ways maybe more helpful because
Hmm.
you know, it's just a kind of more of a realistic view and
And you're still living with it. I mean, you're
yeah,
still living with it. Like we said as we started off, this is not something that just goes away. It's not like the flu that goes away and you don't get it again, right?
totally.
And yeah, and you'd mentioned a little bit earlier that you were ashamed to say that uh, you kind of you kind of lean back on your eating disorder, but
Yeah.
that's really interesting because it's a disorder, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
Yeah.
disorder,
Yeah.
and even with the knowledge and the experience that you've had with it, you still said you felt a little ashamed,
Totally.
and which it's like, wow, you haven't gone through it and you're still having those feelings come back.
Yeah.
Um, is really powerful slash scary slash uh
All the
I don't know
things.
what else it is. It's a lot of things, right?
It's a lot of things. It's pretty overwhelming. Um
Yeah.
I think I used this term, I can't remember if I did a few minutes ago, but chemical residue is the term that my therapist uses when she refers to an old program kind of firing back up again.
Oh,
Because it's
okay.
not necessarily how you operate on a day-to-day basis anymore, but it's still, there's still a little bit of that there. And when something comes up in life where your body's like, hey, like there's a need, there's a struggle that needs to be addressed. Um, like I said, everybody has a coping mechanism, and mine just happens to be pretty toxic. So I just need to be more careful.
One of the things that I learned, which I thought was really, really interesting, is that while we call them mental disorders, there are physical aspects to it. Now, the physical aspects are those that we can't see. Like we can't see the inside of your brain, but
Yeah.
there are things happening physically inside your brain where the neurons aren't firing, where in some cases they're not connecting. You talked about the chemical imbalance, right? Um, those things are real.
Yeah.
Those things are real, and I never realized that. And having learned that, and having learned that there is a physical aspect, for lack of a better term, to mental illness, helped
Yeah.
me enormously. It really helped me enormously. It was like when Baba, my mom, your grandma, right? She had Alzheimer's. I didn't get it until I saw a scan of her brain that showed that the area for short-term memory was gone. It was physically gone. That
Yeah.
that brain matter was gone. And that allowed me to go, oh my, of course I had 1,000 different um, feelings about that because it was, I would always say, Mom, why can't you remember? Mom, you just told me. Mom, you just said that, 10 seconds ago. And so I think, that might help you folks who are listening that there is to a certain extent physical aspects to this within the brain
Mhm.
um,
So,
that that might help you understand this a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your treatment got you to the point to where you know how to cope, right? So you had this episode flare up last week, and um, I never saw you freak out. I just kind of saw you. I just, huh?
Fine. In my
What?
mind, I'm freaking out. Yeah.
Yeah, but I kind of in my mind I attributed that of my not seeing it to your being able to kind of, for lack of a better term, control it, but be aware and be aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
right? And did that awareness help you?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think
Okay.
I mean, I think nowadays a lot of people talk about, you know, how awareness is, you know, half the battle, if not like 90% of the battle, because you can't battle.
Yeah.
Because you can't address it if you don't know that it's happening in the first place. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, after gosh, going to treatment and then doing their outpatient program, and then now I've been in therapy for about 8 years. I still see my dietitian, still see a psychiatrist, all that kind of stuff. I think I have a good amount of learning under my belt to know very clearly that something is wrong. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
obvious to me now when I have an eating disorder urge to do something. Um,
Okay.
and I know, I think that scary part about eating disorders, and I'm sure that there are a lot of parallels between eating disorders and other addictive coping mechanisms and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
disorders. But there is a component that is it's where it's, even though you know it's happening, it's you still don't necessarily do anything about it, right? Because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's where I say I'm ashamed too, is because in a lot of ways I'm super super proud of how far I've come and how
Absolutely.
I've done to kind of rewire the neurons in my brain and the pathways in my brain and all of the work that I've done. I'm super proud of it. So when something comes up to where I get to a point where I'm like, I'm super aware that I'm feeling this way and that it's an eating disorder thing, and life is really really hard right now, so I'm just going to give into it.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um and I think that's, to me, that's the sneakiness of it, right? It just, forget the fact that I know all of these things, and forget the fact that I know that my life is monumentally, astronomically better now that I don't have this eating disorder in the forefront of my mind all the time. It's still, last week was to the point where I was like, I'll just give in once. I'll just,
Yeah.
or twice, or just for a week, and it'll be fine. But just that, like, just taking that step really messed with my mind, because not only did all of the past eating disorder thoughts flood back with like a vengeance,
Oh
but
boy.
I also have this now sort of ethical dilemma on the side, being like, I'm aware of it now, therefore I shouldn't do this kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where it just turns into like just this like tornado in your mind, and that's what I was going through when I saw you last week.
Yeah.
um but it just, yeah, and I it's they always say recovery, no matter what recovery you're in, recovery is not a linear line. It always kind of goes down and then up and then backwards and then flips around and does a little loop-de-loop,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's never a straight line.
It's never a straight line and it's never perfect, and I'm also working on just giving myself a lot of love and kindness to be like, hey, it's okay. I'm human. I make mistakes, and
Yes.
here's how I'm gonna learn
Yes.
from it. And then
Yeah.
really trying to let that sink in, as opposed to kind of the shame and guilt associated with the eating disorder, and moving forward in a healthy way.
You know, the way that I look at you, Kristen, I mean, you are fighting, you continue to fight a mighty, mighty fight. And you will continue to fight that fight because the thing that I learned about your experience is that you talked about that it's not a straight line, but it's a straight line that turns into loop-de-loops and curves and all kinds of curly cues and goes in all different kinds of directions because it never goes away,
Yeah.
right? And it'll show up when you least expect it. It'll show up when you're most vulnerable
Mhm.
and and you're fighting it. And so, you're the kind of person with the work that you do that I do encourage, grace and forgiveness, right? If you give up and you're giving up and you just succumb to the whole thing, that I don't know if that's different or not, but you're still in the fight. You're still in the fight, uh,
Yeah.
and I couldn't be more proud of you.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and through this experience that you've been having, and since you've had it, you've given birth to three boys. You've given your mom and me three grandsons, and you know that that's beyond having children is a miracle. Having children and surviving and thriving the way that you have is supernatural. Um, but talk about that. Talk about that part of your journey a little bit.
Well, I don't think I know that a big part of why I wanted to kind of kickstart this whole process of trying to recover from the eating disorder was so that I could have kids. And
Yeah.
to clarify, my eating disorder never physically, health wise, physically, it never took away my reproductive abilities, right?
Hmm.
Like, it didn't
Hmm.
mess with my period. I didn't, I had some friends in treatment program who had some really, really scary, um, I guess, effects happen to their body because of the amount of weight that they'd lost, right?
Oh, sure.
So um, your body kind of growing or shrinking in different ways in parts that you wouldn't normally have. There's acne, right? Just there's a lot of physical things that happen when you're malnourished, and
Hmm.
that never happened to me because I never stopped eating. I just drastically decreased my calorie intake for X period of time, and then would like drastically increase it for Y period of time, and then kind of go back and forth. So it wasn't that I wasn't physically able to have kids. When I say that it's because I wanted to have kids, it's because I knew in my mind, I was like, there's no way I can have kids right now because I'm imagining, like a little kid being like, Mommy, I want fruit snacks. And I'm going to say, no, you can have the 0-calorie fruit snacks with the zero sugar in it.
Sure, sure.
I don't want you to have all the issues that I had.
Yep.
But I also knew that that would also cause the issues that I had. And at the time when I was fully in it, there was no way for me to see another direction. I was like, if I have kids, I'm going
Hmm.
to pass on what I have, and that's not okay.
Hmm.
I'm have kids if I'm not confident that I won't pass it on. So, so once I went through treatment, I felt a lot more confident in my ability to. I think at that point when I got pregnant with Jason, um, I knew enough to be like, I know what I'm dealing with. I know how to fight it. I know how to get through it, and I know how to get support around it. Um, and I know how to support someone into having good eating habits. And at that point, I think I'd already I remember saying like, gosh, I think I actually, now that I've been through this eating disorder program, have better eating habits than, or I should say, I have a better relationship with food than a lot of people that I
Sure.
knew.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so it's been, I mean, having kids and the potential of having kids has been the reason for doing this. It's kind of been the catalyst that kind of got this all started. And
Yeah. It was your why, right? I mean, you realized that you had this eating disorder, but you also had a vision for your
Yeah.
life that said, I want to have kids? Am I putting, I don't mean to be putting words in your mouth, right?
It
But
just sounds paraphrasing.
huh?
It sounds like you're paraphrasing.
Yeah. And, at least my experience, at least what I understood was that you knew you wanted to have a family. You knew you wanted to have a big family, and you knew that you couldn't do that until you recovered from this thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I tell folks, whether no matter what it is, not necessarily mental illness or anything, but you have to have your why. The why is so, so important to the vision that you create for your life. And your why was bigger than anything on planet Earth. You wanted to start a family, and
Yeah.
you pulled it off. You pulled it off, and they're three unbelievably beautiful children.
Thank
And
you.
I can say that because I'm their grandfather, and grandpas are always right about their grandkids. They're the most beautiful
Oh,
people on planet Earth. So,
absolutely.
so they, and you just agreed. So you just verified it. So, so now, um, as we look in terms of moving forward, and folks who are listening, who are in the middle of an eating disorder, or are suspicious that they have one, are thinking that maybe that's what's going on. Um, what would you tell them if you had them standing right in front? Well, that maybe actually standing right in front of you. What would you tell them? What would your encouragement to them be?
Oh, that it it gets better. And that just whatever work that you want to put into it, that you can put into it, awesome. Even if it's just calling your doctor and saying, "What's up? I think something's going on," or even if it's just deciding that today you're going to have a snack that like maybe nourishes your body a little bit more than you would have, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be. I remember one of the tasks that I had was by my dietitian at the time was eat 1 tablespoon of rice. And I was like, no, absolutely not. And that was my assignment until the next session, which was 2 weeks later. And she's like, I want you to eat 1 tablespoon of rice.
Over
And
the next 2 weeks?
I was like, no. And I was like, I'll try. And that went on for about 3 months. Okay. When I see you again, I want you to have eaten 1 tablespoon of rice. And I was like, and it was like, what kind of rice? How many calories does it have? What color is it? Where is it from? Blah, blah, blah. Like just
Oh, gee.
all of these things.
Wow.
And I never made good on it. So, and that's not to say, I mean, I say that more to speak to how difficult eating disorders can be, right? So it doesn't even need to be a big thing, but just baby steps if you can, and if not, just try to be nice to yourself. If you can reach out to someone, just talk about it, just put it out there. I always tell my dad, put it to the universe, and he always jokes that that's how he got here in the first place.
Yeah.
But no, but it's true. I mean, like just talking to somebody about it, even for a minute, right? Or even just I don't just voicing it and making it so that it's not stuck in your head anymore. Um, can be a really big deal, and you never know what can happen. And if you're not ready to do that, then that's okay too. Just say something nice to yourself today and just be like, yeah, like I'm doing the day. I'm doing the day kind of thing. Because that's what I've learned, what I recently learned was how important it is to speak kindly to yourself.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
much that contributes to the mental illness to begin with. Um, and so that's something that I'm still working on. Um,
I remember one time we were having a conversation, and going back to your comment of be kind to yourself.
Mhm.
And your and my conversation was along the lines of being grateful. And you told me, in my mind, we have so many things to be grateful for. I mean, clean air. Let's start with that, right? Um, but I was stunned by the answer and your response to gratitude. And your response was, I don't deserve to be I don't deserve to be grateful. And that kind of set me back on my heels. And and that was one of the moments that left me um without any clue, without
Mm.
any clue of what was going on with, with you. And so, I can from that I learned that it's tough. It's really tough, and it can be tough to be kind to yourself, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think too, I can't speak for everybody, but at least myself and for the folks who I knew in my eating disorder program, a theme that I noticed is that people with eating disorders tend to be really mean to themselves.
Sure.
Um, and I mean, you can kind of imagine it, right? Like you look in a mirror and you start being mean to all the parts of your body that you don't like, and you start picking yourself apart, and you hear these narratives of what your body should look like in the media, right? Socially, all these different things, and you're like, I don't look like that, and you just start beating yourself up, and that continues inward, right? It continues to every
Right.
and
Right.
everything. Why can't I do this? I'm not good enough. And I think those are probably the nicer of words that a lot of people choose, because yeah, it can get pretty nasty. But I think for me specifically, when I said I didn't deserve to feel grateful, I think there were multiple components of it. I think one of them were I didn't I didn't feel like I deserved the things that I had, because I know that I have a lot to be grateful for. But I think, and gratitude is such a powerful feeling, right? Like, I mean, that's why in meditations and in social media, right? That's why it's such a buzzword nowadays, is because all these people are picking up on the fact that it's such a powerful feeling, and it can really change your outlook on things. It can change your mood. It can change your relationships, right? Like all these different things. But I never felt that, right? I would say thank you to people and I would say that I'm grateful for things, but I never actually felt it.
Mm.
I only felt the shame and the sadness and the anger, right? So I didn't have those feelings because I didn't really believe them for myself to
Hmm.
offset the bad ones. I didn't have those like energizing feelings. I only had the negative ones, the
Yeah.
depleting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what you described to me is a downward spiral,
Yeah, and
right?
what I'm also
I mean,
describing is depression.
yeah. So when if somebody finds himself in that place, is there
Mhm.
what anything they can do?
I mean,
Get help. Get help.
yeah, get help for
Get
sure.
help.
For
Yeah.
sure. I mean, talk to someone who specializes in what you're dealing with exactly. If you think you have depression, don't just go to some random therapist. Make sure you reach out to that person. You're like, hey, I'm dealing with what I think is depression. Can you help me through that? Do you have experience with that? Right. And then kind of go from there. If you suspect you have an eating disorder, find a therapist who specializes in eating disorder. That is so important, because n- all therapists are not the same
Right.
at
Right. We learned that. We
oh
learned that.
gosh.
Yeah.
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 So I mean, fine tune it as much as you can. Call your PCP, your primary care physician. You can call the nurse hotline on your insurance card, that 24/7 nurse hotline. Um, I mean, like I said earlier, just talk to someone, just put it
Yeah. And it
out.
was amazing that number, that emergency hotline number on the insurance card, right? That's what you did. And you
Yeah.
just said, "Hey, I just want to talk to somebody. This is what I'm going through." And they said, "You need to get attention on this right away."
Yeah.
So you went from a suspicion to an absolute confirmation that
Mhm.
yeah, something did need to be attended to.
Mhm.
As you look back and you look forward, both as it relates to your loved ones in your life, your family, your dad, that jerk face, but your dad, and your friends and your loved ones. What can they do?
I think a lot of different things. I think there's a lot of levels of support that they can give, right? But I think, I don't know, it always goes back to the person who's having a hard time. I just,
Yeah.
because I mean, so much about eating disorders is secretive, right? Like, so much of what, I mean, you said this at the beginning of this call, like there was so much of what I said even in our last podcast talk that you'd never heard,
Right.
right?
Right.
There's just millions of components that are so secretive, so it can be really hard to tell, even for the people closest to them, if something's wrong. So I think first and foremost, it's up to the person having a hard time to
Yeah.
voice that they're having a hard time, right? I think loved ones can, there's a million books on eating disorders, right? Just picking up a book and seeing, trying to understand it, Googling it,
And
right?
there's now a million YouTube videos on it, right?
Yeah, and I think there's so much value and so much power in loved ones understanding what the person's going through, because the person who's going through it, I can pretty much guarantee you, feels like a crazy person, and they
Hmm.
feel really out of control. So for the people most important to them to come up to them and be like, I understand you, I get it, and I'm here to just be with you and support you and accept you, is like the best thing ever. So I think that there's so many resources on eating disorders nowadays, to
Yeah.
just watch a quick YouTube video or just read a quick article or anything like that. There's different eating disorder organizations have support groups for loved ones, even virtual support groups that you can
Hmm.
Zoom. Um, I think, just not saying anything about physical appearance is a big deal. And not only the loved one's physical appearance, but everybody's physical appearance. Take the value off of your look,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And just normalize talking about everything else. Um, because our society is just very focused on placing a lot of value on how you look.
Yeah.
And that's kind of at the crux of the eating disorder.
And it is impossible for everybody to live up to that standard. It's just impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And and so yeah, and I keep coming around to this, but as it relates to your loved ones, it's all about love. It's all about love. And we try to remind you every day that we love you. And because that's all we knew. And here you are. Here we are talking about it. I mean, how cool is that? Right?
Totally, totally.
That you're able to, and you're talking about it sort of kind of as you're still in the midst of um an episode. An
Oh,
episode that,
I
huh?
have a therapy appointment tomorrow. I'm meeting with my dietitian on Friday. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm still very much all hands on deck right now. I know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
look so put together,
No,
but
you don't. No, you don't. Not at all.
but it just, yeah, it's I mean, this morning I did a breathing exercise to sort of ground myself before the day so I could just think straight
Yeah.
throughout the day, and I'm taking a lot more breaks than I normally do, and I'm just trying to check in with myself and um making sure that I'm eating and nourishing my body, and um yeah, just all hands on deck as far as trying to take care of myself and make sure that I don't spiral and get into a
And
relapse.
I just did something really stupid, didn't I? You
What?
said that you looked all together, and I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. I mean, you just got done telling us don't focus on people's appearance. And I just said, no, you look anyway, I'm not gonna repeat it.
I
You see that jerk face dad of yours. I mean,
just, and that's it's not that kind of thing that I'm talking about. It's more
okay.
part someone's body and having a
Yeah.
body
Yeah.
Nah, all that fun
Yeah,
stuff.
okay. Nah. Okay. Well, good. Well, Kristen, you know what? Um I know that there are folks out there who will have learned about eating disorders because of you. And I'd love to have you back at some point in time. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I just said I hope it's helpful. I hope I don't freak anybody out, but I also I hope I provided a healthy dose of this is what's up.
Yeah, yeah, and a little bit of education for not only those going through it, but for those who love those who are going through it. Because it is a all hands on deck journey. But I'll tell you, it can work. It can work beautifully, and you just keep going. You just keep going, you know.
Yeah.
But if, as always, as with everything I talk about, if you can create that why in your life based on the vision that you set for your life, um, that 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 goes a long, long way. Just like Kristen's vision was to have a family, and that became her why. Um, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing. Kristen, thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing such a big, big part of your life that lots of folks out there can learn from. Um, I love you more than anything. You're just amazing. So with that, folks, thank you for joining us. Um, Share this, subscribe to this. We're gonna have lots more conversations about a whole bunch of different things. And so thanks for joining us. I love you. God bless you. And we'll see you next time. Bye.